Hello, my name is Adam Bean and welcome to the 48th edition of Airhacks TV. And I'm just around the, just after the airhacks.com regular workshops at the airport Munich. And what we did, we covered some web stuff. And what I decided to do is to split the workshops into two parts, very similar to the Java EE workshops. So the first one is like the Bootstrap Java EE, where I show all the APIs from JavaScript, CSS, web APIs, service workers, offline apps, offline caches, whatever you need to build an app. And the second part, and also web components, the technical stuff. And the second part is what you can do with to build or how to build web apps just using web standards, so no additional libraries with custom elements or web components and service workers and web workers and so forth. And so I actually wanted to name the first workshop Java EE Bootstrap, Web Bootstrap. The problem is, of course, there is a Bootstrap framework, Twitter Bootstrap. So I just renamed that to Web Essentials, and the next one is Effective Web. Okay, the next workshop is around the corner, is the remaining 20%. So what I still think is with Java EE covers 80-90% of all cases. But what happens if you need, for instance, Kafka or distributed caches or whatever you may need, which is not part of Java EE. So I will cover as many such technologies as possible, even OpenShift clouds and so forth. So, and in winter, there will be the regular winter edition of Java EE Bootstrap and architectures, microservices, and performance. So the last winter, so in 2017, it was overcrowded. So so if you would like to attend, please book early. So now let's start with the questions. So the very first question, Coolman P asked me, how to serialize and deserialize hierarchical POJO hierarchies from into JSON using JSON-B. And what I just did, I checked out JSON, which happens to be the reference implementation for JSON-B. So this is the Eclipse project, and as you can, JavaX JSON bind example. So as part of the project is the canonical Java EE resource, and what you can see here, there are several several examples. So we have the author, we have the book, and we have the language. So and this is somehow somehow hierarchical structure. And what happens here? It just uses it just serializes and deserializes, for instance, the books from to JSON. So this is the runtime example, and it also shows how to customize the mapping. So it works out of the box. So if you like, take a look at the examples. So check out the JSON-B examples from GitHub. This is what I did, and the first example was hierarchical structure. I hope this is the answer to your question. Perfect. So the next one, good morning, Adam. So Veneto asked me, so there's a mix of different programming languages like Bash, K-Shell, Perl, Python. And the question is how to build, pipelines with that. And I actually don't use any of these languages. What I do, I use the pipeline as a code feature from Jenkins 2. And what it means is there is going to be a Jenkins file inside the project. So this is actually what I did in the testing workshop a few weeks ago at the airport Munich. So what I did is I created on the fly a Jenkins file, and the Jenkins file just built the projects, tested the project, and created the microservice, shipped the microservice, performed the system test, and so forth. And there are actually two possibilities. The one is using the Jenkins file scripting mode. So where you can do full control of the environment. This is Groovy still. You can, of course, use Java because it's Groovy. So you can mix Java and Groovy. And the next one is like Groovy in DSL mode, with a little bit more restricted mode, but it is a cleaner one. So what I do is, where possible, I always use the Jenkins file DSL mode because it's cleaner and more restrictive. And if there is no possible, I just switch to the scripting mode. So I don't use the embedded scripts within the Jenkins file, and I never used other programming languages. So what this means is sometimes, of course, if there is complex stuff to do, what you can do, you can create bash scripts, and you can call from Jenkins file the shell script, like with sh. This is the command. So if there is using keys, for instance, we had to check out code, from instance, and or create a branch. Sometimes it is easier to use the native Git client instead of using a DSL, a Jenkins file. So this is what I do. So again, start with Jenkins DSL. If it's not sufficient, use Jenkins file scripting mode. If this is not sufficient, just call bash files or Z shell. So Arkenroot asked me, following Glide4j suggestion for your Java missions. Yeah, my Java mission. So by the way, I don't really have a Java mission, so I'm actually trying, to make my clients happy. And what my clients would like to do is just to implement their business stuff as quickly as possible, and then don't care a lot about the technology anymore. And if so, what I do is I try to find, the most popular and the most boring technology on earth, and usually this is Java E. So I use Java E, whatever server they have, and we start without any dependencies. Why that? Because we can just, any other developer can just pick up the project, and if there are no dependencies, there's nothing to migrate. So, and this one, what you're suggesting here, is a very specific framework or tool which implements out of the box the CQRS pattern from microservices. Having said that, usually I don't have these problems yet in my projects. So what we sometimes have is, how to reliably communicate between microservices. And usually what I prefer to do is to use JMS in case the JMS server is already clustered and available in the projects. For instance, in my current project, there was a question, we would like to use messaging between microservices. What you will suggest, Kafka or whatever. So before I will have to install Kafka, I would rather like to rely on existing JMS server. Is there something out there? And there is. So we are just evaluating the possibility to access remotely the JMS server. Is this already clustered and reliable and is already operated properly? So we will use stock JMS, and with JMS context from JMS to O, it is very easy to send and receive messages. So use the old boring JMS instead of new exciting Kafka, but I'm too lazy to install stuff in case something old and boring is already available. Okay, so this is about that. So I will come back to this topic in case I get a customer problem or customer challenge and it isn't possible to solve it with JMS. Then I will look at that and I will show you what you can do with Kafka. And by the way, in the next workshop, we will use Kafka just for fun, but just for fun is no different mode of operations. Kelsas ask me, say you have 40K of rows of data that you want to use in JSF autocomplete components. How best can you handle the data retrieval to enhance performance? So I had to do something similar ways back, actually. This was years back. And what I did is I started with unit test and a named query on JPA, because I had to use JPA back then. And there are several hundred thousands data sets, and I had to do something like Google suggest. So, if you write, for instance, M, there would be Munich will come back, and probably, what else? Monaco, Munich, and Münster. And if you, for instance, type MU, like Uber, UI, then it will suggest Münster and Munich, or München at least. Okay, and so what I did first is I wrote an integration test, actually not a unit test, and to see whether the query is performant enough. And then if you have the query, you can execute the query. You can suggest, in the JSF autocomplete. It's not like you will load into JSF autocomplete the whole thing, 40,000 K, and just pick it up. So I did it online. And there, usually the next question is, would you like to implement it by yourself, which is not a big deal, but the question why, or use, for instance, prime faces for that, where you get ready to use component, which would be my preference in case your client or users like the components. And thank you for watching my stuff. So, logging and diagnostic context, another question from Veneto, which is with nice doc and the question is, operations pains like what to do is if you have socket timeout without any context. So in my eyes, you should test that up front. So what I don't think it is possible to have a magic switch which dumps everything out, because it usually is too much information. So I don't have the problem that exception happened and I don't know what happens. So what usually happens to me is like we have some performance concurrency or deadlock bug, robustness bug, and now I know how to get the context, because if we switch everything on, the logging on, the application will be just serialized, so there will be no more concurrency, and usually the bug disappears, which is called Heisenberg bug. So what I would like to do is, I would actually like to test that. So what I actually did back then, there's a project called Snail, and 2 years ago, and what Snail is like an interceptor which artificially slows down your application. And what you can do, you can test your timeouts with that, for instance. And so I built it for exactly this purpose, to see what happens in case your application becomes too slow. And then you can provide more context information. So what I would rather like to do is to test the problems and provide additional information without overwhelming the user or operator, instead of relying on magic switches. Because to write all exceptions, the question is, do the exception have enough context information like messages? I would rather test the failures. And this is if you watch the stuff. So what I said over and over again, unit tests and integration tests are nice, but stress tests are really, really important, because then you see the problems and you can really easily emulate the problems. This was actually the performance workshop what I did last year and repeat in winter. So what we did, we just overloaded a server and watched the exceptions. And the question is, do we have enough context information? So I have questions about monitoring EJB transactions. Is it possible to list current active transactions? Absolutely it is. Usually the application servers are able to provide you a list of active transactions. And for instance, in the Payara case, you have to monitor the transactions subsystem, and you will see actually a list of transactions IDs, which is a live list. And when it was started and what class method fired it up, this is a little bit harder, because in a live system there can be several thousand transactions per second. Actually, in my one of my clients last year wanted to have a system with we had to handle 4,000 transactions per node. So, and I forgot how big was the cluster. So imagine, how to monitor that. So you have a live system like, how to visualize several thousand transactions per second in real time. So, so how to deal with that? So what I forgot the name actually. In the green book, what I did is I implemented an interceptor. And the interceptor, this is rethinking best practices. This is the green book. And in this green book, I introduced an interceptor, and this is and the interceptor renamed the thread. And it used the name of the boundary, and the name of the boundary was the thread. So if something happened to the boundary, you can at least have a heap stack trace and you would see, by the name of the thread, which is normal name of the thread rather than the name of the method, and you would see actually what the name of the method, of the problematic method is, and usually a thread and transactions are the same in the architecture because the boundary starts a new transaction and the transaction runs synchronously in the thread. And no, I think I blocked about that. So if you go to my blog, let's see, thread. Years old. This is exactly the code. And this is exactly 10 years old. So as you can see, this is the interceptor. And what it does, it picks the method name, it renames the current thread, invokes the method, and then renames it back. And what you see then, a list of all transactions as a list of methods. So something like this could be helpful. And the next is additional in these days, I'm looking for a free tool to monitor JMS queues. I mean, monitor there is a tool, an old tool called Hermes JMS, I think. Yeah, very old, Hermes. And this is like you can monitor what's going on in the queues. What you can also have is Queue Browser, is a regular Java class coming from JMS API, and you can monitor the contents of the queue. And if you have particular servers like Whitefly or Glassfish or Payara or Tommy, what you can still do is JMX, of course, because the JMS servers usually are built in Java and they expose lots of JMX monitoring capabilities. So to play with the JMS, like with JDBC content, the Hermes JMS is the right tool. And to monitor the performance, I would rely on JMX because most of the JMS servers expose their stuff via JMX. So, wonderful code in Afterburner. So I'm trying to implement a solution for a table view holding 1,000 to 2,000 columns. And the problem is it just breaks down. I would say the problem is probably the tables are not designed to have 2,000 columns. You have 2,000 columns in a view rows, the situation can escalate. And what I think what happens is you get some problems with the native widgets. So I would say I wouldn't attempt to have that many columns. So just imagine you have to scroll 2,000 columns. You have to scroll on the right and left sides. I would just create either a custom component or rethink, the design, because I don't think the table header and the tables are designed to hold 2,000 columns. So, Elite BTD asked me, what is my opinion on using REST web service to authenticate and authorize users in multiple web apps on the internet? Yeah, you have to do this. And what usually, what you should do is the JWT JSON Web Token, if you can. And it is already supported by the security API from Java 8, which can be used in Java 7. And there are several patterns. One of the patterns like having like a boundary or perimeter facade, whatever, or entry service gateway, whatever you would call it. And this service would translate, the JWT token to internal calls, for instance. But I would say authenticate and authorize user in REST web services. Usually the JWT or JOT is the way to go because it's also well integrated with JavaScript frameworks. And this is the point. Like you would like to authenticate and authorize from your web app. So is there any way to marshal Java JSON objects from like with JAX-B? Of course it is. It's called JSON-B, and we already covered that. So recently I decided to give a try on ECB control boundary pattern, and I have some doubts. Where do I put my exceptions and exceptions mappers if I have to create them? So the exceptions usually happens in entities or controls or boundaries, and they are related to the business logic from controls, boundaries, or entities. So just put the exceptions close to the entities, controls, and on boundaries, and do not create your own exception packages. Just take a look, for instance, exception are objects, I think was the blog post. Yeah. So let's take a look at this blog post. What I did is I just tried to explain, treat the exceptions as objects and they're nothing special. So then just hold the exceptions close to entities, controls, or boundaries. So I will handle exceptions like enums, for instance. So this would be my way to go. It's like, yeah. Okay. If I need a repository or some utility classes, where it goes, repository is nothing special, it's just control. So I do not make any difference between the repositories, DAOs, or whatever. Oh, DAOs is special thing. Data access object. When I need data access objects in case I have to communicate with unusual resource, like for instance, LDAP or flat files or a NoSQL database or Kafka, or Kafka is already well integrated with APIs, but let's say, a strange resource, an old resource, legacy resource, I would create DAO for that, for JPA, entity manager, and no DAOs are needed. So, and where it goes, it is just a control, and it is, you don't need any abstract classes, so there is nothing to do. How would a large application with several modules be organized in this pattern? So there's already a YouTube screencast about that, but I think I'm not really satisfied with the screencast. I'll probably re-record that because I get many questions about that. So a large application will comprise several packages, and the packages are named about the concepts, after the concepts. For instance, you would have like order package, and you would have a address package and taxation package, and the packages are the components and they can communicate with each other. And if there are too many packages, then you would create another war which contains several packages, and then we have microservices. Do you think that JSF is going to be deprecated anytime soon? No, I think JSF is still great. If you can live with the components, server-side rendering is an option, and I don't think whether it is going to be deprecated. It's just I like the technology, and not only I like the technology, lots of startups really like JSF because it's very productive. The problem is it's misused by in many corporations, to implement everything, and JSF cannot be pixel perfect. If you pick, for instance, prime faces, there are, for instance, some pre-assumptions how it looks and feels, so you cannot change it a lot. So you cannot just, transform a table to a tree. So this is where the trouble starts. And there are trends, React or Angular, or the next trend is my clients try to skip the frameworks and just use the web standards, because if you pick a framework, the question is how long this framework is going to be around. And in some of my projects, we have both. We have used JSF applications for back office, and on, for instance, one project React, and the other projects web standards for pixel perfect clients. Okay, the next one is JSF 1.2 and CDI Bean, and some things with Java Roaster. I think the Java Roaster is like Java parsing library from Red Hat, I think. And I have to migrate EJB 2 to 3, and this is Java standard project which is no more supported by Whitefly 8. Entity beans are no longer supported. What is your suggestion about this specific kind of migration process? I found some migration tools, but finally no one works well. Yeah, of course, nothing will work well. So take a look whether it's called, I think, localhost. No. I think I have a migration post, should be also 10 years old, So we will have to take a look at that. So just to search local home, remote home. So the point is the EJB3 or EJB2 with one annotation called remote home can be very easily transformed into EJB3. This was my trick. So I will just keep the interfaces, the local home and remote home interfaces, and then transform the just the EJB2 into EJB3 by adding the interface, the annotation. And I think it's called remote home annotation. Yes. And with that annotation, an EJB2 becomes an EJB3, and you can delete already the deployment descriptors. So which is a big deal. And then with entity beans, what I did with entity beans, so back then we had to use xDocklet. I hope you are also using xDocklet, because what xDocklet did, it generated value objects. This was wrongly named data transfer objects. So they were not value objects rather than data transfer object, but it was provided out of the box by xDocklet. And the value objects, if you look at them, they are basically very similar to JPA. So we just let xDocklet generate the value objects from entities. All the dependencies were already covered. Then we put some annotations on the value objects, and we got a JPA, and we just deleted the entity beans. This was one manual strategy. The other one was, it was a BA project, and BA wrote all the persistence mapping in, I think was called WebLogic CMP or something, deployment descriptor. And if you look at the descriptor, all the information you need is already there. So we wrote a code generator which read the XML file and generated the POJOs. It sounds complicated, but it was actually very simple. And we used JSON-B and how it's called, not free marker, velocity. Right now you could even use Nashorn for that. So this could work. So how should I use JDBC data source given by container? You just inject data source, call get connection. You have to close it, because if you close the connection, it is going to be returned to the pool. So you have to close it. You can close whatever you like, but you have to close the connection. So if you don't close or you can use the closable, auto-closable with try with resources. Are SQL queries invoking current JTA transactions? Yes, they are. The JDBC data source, what you also should do is to use the same JDBC data source as the entity manager uses, so they could even participate in the same transaction. Throwing exceptions, rollbacks, transaction. Throwing exceptions. So yeah, if an exception is thrown, the transaction is going to be rolled back. But SQL exception is not a checked exception. It is a checked exception, not a runtime exception. So SQL exception will not roll back the transactions. But hence it is, because it is not a runtime exception, you will have to catch the SQL exception and rethrow it as runtime, for instance, or web application exception. But what you can do is you can just roll back the transaction. So Arian Teams just says answers the question with the JSF, and he is also very positive about the JSF future. And the remaining remark about JSF future is it is also about the community. So if no one is interested in JSF anymore, regardless how good it is, it will die. So this is also a problem, right? So, and on 5th March, he asked me, could you please take a look at the project's JSF test? And yes, so I check it out. So first, POM looks great, as it should be. One dependency Java 7 and prime faces. So, and then we have one JSF page, and we have control entity exception ambient. So first, what is lacking? The component name. So there is no component. Next one, there should be no exception. So if you take a look, unique person exception, we have person. So the exception, in my eyes, should be here. should be inside the person. So what's so mbin, so person bin is just for the mapping. This is not, yeah, you could yeah. So if you like, just do this cleaner. It doesn't have a session scope. Okay. The question: do you need session? Then it should be serializable. Person, new person. Okay, you could do this. Instead of this, I would do that. So it creates this session and then writes the message. Okay, you could do the message this way, or I would just inject, expose a getter setter with the message, so that you can yeah, and then I wouldn't call it mbin. Rather than what I will do, I would have here two packages. So one is called business persons, for instance. And actually all the things here are going here into persons. And then this is going to be refactor, rename, presentation. So, and now we have the presentation with person bin. So it's nice, and I would rather call it index view, because it is related to index, and yeah, you can name it person or not. So this is my feedback about the code organization, and of course delete this. And the cool story is now we can have REST services here, and we have the index view here. So we have control entity, and there is no boundary. So this is the next thing. So usually you would like to have here boundary, new Java class persons.boundary, and let's call it person store, and the boundary is stateless, and yeah, this is the problem. This is actually a boundary, not a control, so there are no controls. Delete. Yes. Present session, then no one is interested in the session, so just call it store or whatever it does. This is not needed because there is only one. And flush. This is true. So you have to invoke flush in case to provoke the exception. So the exception happens earlier with that, and then you can throw unique person exception. But the unique person exception, in my eyes, should be, for instance, a runtime exception, or yeah, runtime exception in this case. So runtime exception. Yeah. Okay. So this is what I will do, and equals in hash code on entities is not necessarily required, and toString. Okay, so a little bit of cleanup, and of course don't do this. Return the name, and we know what getters and setters are. So now we are a little bit cleaner, and not in that index. Index. So this was my feedback, but the question is this a good approach when developing JSF application? Yes. If I don't call business exceptions not thrown, is calling flush a correct way? Yes, if you would like to see the exceptions earlier. Cool. So now, Betxaburu asked me about JSON-B again, and we already answered exactly the question already. And the last one is what about async in my videos? So what I did, I recorded a video here longer time ago, and what I do in the video, I create an asynchronous client with completable future. And why I did it? Because I got lots of questions on how to have asynchronous communication without, allocating too many threads. So I just showed you what it does. And what I also did, I did the same in my microservices course, Java EE microservices, Java EE micro.services. So exactly. So this is it builds a full pipeline with that. So if you're interested in this, take a look at this course. And what I wanted to say is, it just works in all my cases. So I just tested with all the servers and using production, and it just works. So it's really hard to tell what the problem is and why it doesn't work for you. But if it waits, it means the server just blocks and there is no response. And what it also happens, I guess in my example, I didn't caught the exception. So if you do not handle the exceptions in the asynchronous pipeline, the exceptions are going to be swallowed and you will wait forever. So this might be the reason why it does not work in your case. And why it doesn't is the question though. What you should do is just introduce a handle exception or a peak to see what happens, or how it's called, handle peak and on arrow. I think there are several methods in the completable future API. Just enhance my example with that, and you should be able to catch the exception on the server side. So okay, so thank you. See you at upcoming workshops, and in April if you like. This is just around the corner. Or in winter, or in autumn, if you would like to see how to build web apps with routing, offline capabilities, like Swing with WebStart without Swing and WebStart, just with JavaScript. So thank you for watching, and see you at conferences, workshops, projects, and enjoy the spring. Okay, bye.